there, Jenny Clark here with Solvability. We got another session of Freedom Friday. I am so excited to have my friend Richard Arnholt back from Bassberry and Sims talking about a lot of the legal issues that affect government contractors. So Bassberry Sims has been part of my GovCon Summit for the last several years. And you see, I wrote I wrote about Solvability / GovCon Summit is where you register for this event. So be sure to pass the word. So Richard, would love to have you talk about really the top 3 or 4 issues people are calling you about today, especially as they impact small business in federal contracting. So Richard, you've been with Bassberry Sims for a while. Can you give a little bit about your background and then let's just start talking?
Sure. Well, thanks very much, Jenny. It's a pleasure to be with everybody today. As you mentioned, I'm at Bassberry and Sims in the government contracts practice group. I've been with Bassberry for about 6 years, but I've been practicing in the government contracts area for almost 20 years. I clerked for a year at the Court of Federal Claims that hears claims against the federal government, bid protests and contract claims, as well as has some jurisdiction in other areas as well, and have been practicing at firms in DC in this space since then. I do some counseling, some bid protest work, False Claims Act litigation, and also claims against the government. So we have a pretty varied practice in DC, and also some M&A support as well.
Well, that's really good to know, because I have run into clients that'll call me and they say, I got to talk to somebody. And I said, well, you got to talk to Richard Arnholt or Todd Overman or one of those guys up at Bassberry Sims. And you've been super accommodating on getting them the answer, and they've called back and thanked me about it. So tell us a little bit more about what the hot topics are these days in federal contracting.
Well, I think one of the only certainties is any government contractor knows in this space is that there's going to be change. There's change from one administration to another. Congress is always tinkering with the procurement system, hoping to improve it. And that's true today as it is, as it's always been. I think there are 3 major areas I wanted to touch on today. One is in the domestic preference space. There have been recent changes to the Buy American Act, some from the prior administration, and also a new executive order from President Biden that potentially will have significant changes. And the second area I wanted to talk about a little bit is the Paycheck Protection Program. The deadline for, I think, for second draw PPP loans is coming up soon. I wanted to talk very briefly about what the application standards are for that, and also good faith safe harbor. I know many people are curious about potential liability for seeking forgiveness of those loans, and I think it's important when people are thinking about that they know what the safe harbors are. And the last topic I wanted to touch on is the Cybersecurity Maturity Model Certification. This is the new third-party assessment certification of cyber security that DoD's put into place. I think they were dissatisfied self-certification standard. This is going to be a requirement for every supplier to the Department of Defense, other than suppliers of commercial off-the-shelf items, by 2025. It's only going to apply to a couple of procurements over the next few months, but it's vitally important that all DoD contractors start thinking about this and making sure their IT systems are compliant. So when they do identify opportunity, they're ready to go.
Well, those are all 3 very important topics, because people ask me about those all the time. And that's part of the reason we created GovCon Summit and GovCon Community, so that we have almost a community of practice that knows how to get the answers, knows how to collaborate, and has created a very cohesive network to get the answer. So let's start with the Buy American Act. I mean, there's always been a clause of Buy American. And I can remember I had a client that did promotional, they were doing like t-shirts for the National Guard that had certain symbols on them, and somebody goofed and ordered them from China, and they spent years trying to get paid on it and get it resolved. So tell them about Buy American, the changes, if you would, please.
Sure. So the Buy American Act is a domestic press statute that requires goods be made in the United States if they're sold to the U.S. government. The way it's implemented, though, is as a price preference, not a prohibition on non-American goods. So for most procurements under around $185,000, the Buy American Act is going to apply. And if you're selling American goods to the government, for small businesses, previously you'd get a 12% price preference. And for large businesses, previously you'd get a 6% price preference. An executive order by President Trump made significant changes to this domestic preference regime. The FAR Council, Federal Acquisition Regulation Council, issued a final rule just in the last 24 hours of the Trump administration implementing this executive order. It does three main things. The first is it increases the amount of domestic content required to qualify as a U.S. good from 50 to 55%. That applies generally. It also, for the first time, created a subcategory for predominantly iron and steel products. And now, for the first time ever, there's this distinction in the Buy American Act. For a domestic or steel product to be considered domestic, it has to have no more than 5% foreign iron or steel. So 95% domestic iron or steel. Now that's a very significant jump from the previous 50% standard that was applicable to iron and steel products under the Buy American Act. There is already a distinction between iron and steel products and other manufactured products in the Buy America regulations, which are a separate scheme that are applicable to Department of Transportation acquisitions and to grants. But this is potentially going to be the most challenging of the Buy American Act changes that Trump implemented. And the last change is to increase the price preference for civilian agency procurements from 12% to 30% for small businesses, and from 6% to 8% for large businesses. And I think part of the thinking about increasing the price preference while simultaneously increasing the domestic content requirement was that this greater price preference would motivate people to spend the additional money necessary to change their supply chains and their manufacturing processes so that they would be able to meet these higher domestic content requirements. But interestingly, the FAR Council's rule admits that they did no analysis to determine whether or not U.S. industry was going to be able to meet these higher domestic preference requirements. They did no analysis as to what the impact in terms of greater foreign goods being sold to the government would be, and they didn't analyze whether or not the increased domestic preference would be efficient to motivate our supply base to make these changes necessary to meet these higher domestic preference standards. I think they had to implement the rule. It was in an executive order, so it had to go forward anyway, but the oversight is pretty significant. So this rule, while it's meant to protect U.S. domestic manufacturing and sales to the U.S. government, may have the counterintuitive impact of increasing the sale of foreign goods to the U.S. government, particularly iron and steel. So.
Well, it's really interesting when you see changes in legislation like this, that it's a pendulum going from protectionism, anti-protectionism, going from let's buy everything overseas because it's cheaper and that's what Americans want, to, oh my gosh, we don't have any jobs here. It's also the loss of our defense industrial base. And that's part of the reason that we're talking about CMMC. So I'm kind of tossing it out of order. One of my concerns with CMMC has been that small business in general doesn't understand the requirements of cybersecurity maturity compliance, I think is what the C is for. And when they announced it, Pentagon said, I think it was in some of the stuff that was published, where they said, well, it's only going to cost $300. I'm like, you're kidding me. This is going to cost so much money. And my biggest concern is not for manufacturers, it's for the service contractors that I personally work with, that have cybersecurity specialists, or they hire veterans with clearances, because I know they're going to be held to a higher standard from a cybersecurity, and we don't want to destroy that base of talented workers at the same time. So I got off a little bit on the tangent, but CMMC has been around, and it sounds like they slid it a little bit. But tell us about CMMC and what's important about that, Richard.
So thanks, Jenny. So previously, the Department of Defense recognized that that there was a weakness in our information protection system. The federal government is fairly good at protecting its IT systems, although not great. There have been serious hacks over the past few years. But the government contracting supply base to DoD has a lot of what DoD refers to as covered defense information or controlled unclassified information about different programs, about different financial issues. And a lot of data has been exfiltrated or stolen by our adversaries, the Chinese in particular. Information about the F-35 program's been stolen from Lockheed Martin, and information about all sorts of other programs, submarine programs, space programs have been stolen by adversaries. So previously, the Department of Defense required that contractors self-certify compliance with a NIST standard, or the National Institute of Science and Technology standard for IT security. But I think DoD had gotten frustrated that that was just not sufficient assurance that these contractors had protected their IT systems and reporting hacks when they did occur. So they've moved now to the cybersecurity maturity model certification that's going to require a third-party assessor to come in and evaluate a contractor's IT security system and certify it to meet one of 5 CMMC levels. The first level is basic cybersecurity hygiene, and the 5th level is, extreme cybersecurity for companies that are doing work like Lockheed Martin on nuclear programs or space programs, or presumably F-35 will require level 5 CMMC certification. The standard is, I think, is now finalized, and maybe they're waiting to respond to some comments. But they've set up a body called the CMMC Accreditation Body, or CMMC AB, that is training certifiers. And DIA recently has been fascinated with Star Wars and Star Wars acronyms. They've got the Jedi Cloud Program, and they've called these third-party assessment organizations C3PAOs. I don't know if George Lucas is getting any royalties from DoD's naming schemes, but there are now some certified C3PAOs out there. And you can find them on the CMMC Accreditation Body's website under the Marketplace link. So you can actually, you can find some of these organizations. If you want to engage them, to have them come in and take a look at your IT systems early on and give you an assessment of sort of where you are in compliance requirements and what it would take for you to get to certain CMMC levels, that might not be a bad idea. If you do engage any cybersecurity companies to assist you with this, please make sure that they're certified. There's been a lot of fraud in this space. There's going to be probably tens or hundreds of millions of dollars spent by the DoD supplies in cybersecurity upgrades and certification over the next 5 years. Every DoD contractor has to be certified by 2025. So there is tons of opportunity for fraud here by unscrupulous so-called cybersecurity experts. And so that's why I think it's terrific that the CMMC AB has posted information about all the assessors and C3PAOs that are certified. So please check if you're going to engage someone, take a look there, see if there's someone in your community, in your area who is doing this kind of work and has the necessary certifications.
Well, I think that's so important what you're talking about. And that's why at the GovCon Summit, we're doing CMMC again, and we've done it every year for several years. We've actually created something that I call the CMMC or Cyber Alliance, a numbers of companies from different parts of the country that have different approaches to how to meet these requirements. And we're doing sessions specifically on that during the event. But we also are wanting to create ways that people can find the right talent. And that's the whole reason of having GovCon Summit, because you're right, there are unscrupulous operators out there that will tell an unsuspecting company we can do this when they actually have no idea what defense requirements are, and they make it sound like they do. But the ones that we brought on board are companies that I know have been following the cybersecurity activity for 15, 20 years. And that's why I'm confident we've got the right group of people to bring that training in. And we actually have one of the companies that is teaching the CP3AOs as well to do the assessments, because most companies would decide that they need to do the cybersecurity assessment. They can do a little bit on their own, but then they do need to have an expert. It's been a big issue with the state of Florida as well. And I've gotten them engaged with what we're doing at GovCon Summit, because I said, state of Florida, are you helping small businesses get certified? They said, oh, yes, we are. We have a database. I looked in their database and they were all manufacturers. I said, do you not understand that the ones that need the most help are the small subcontractors, the veteran-owned small businesses, many of them that don't even show up in any database as getting contracts. And those are the exact people that are going to really have the cost challenge related to this. Most of the companies that I've talked to are going to spend at least $30,000 up to $100,000, $300,000. And we've actually got a CEO panel with Tim Jones of Cybrix Corporation and Donna Honeycutt of WWC Global talking about that. They said they're telling people how many people they've got on board just tracking this requirement, 3 and 4 people just to do this work. So more about CMMC, I think we've covered it, but what about your last topic, the PPP?
Sure. One other quick thing about CMMC, Jenny, if you don't mind, is that the costs of CMMC certification are allowable, but the fact that costs are allowable is not very helpful for a small business that isn't going to be able to spread those costs over the next 12 months, right, and can't pay 30 grand out of pocket. But also the CMMC requirements are going to flow down all the way from the prime contractor to subcontractors and lower tier subs, unless that subcontract is for commercial off-the-shelf items. So I suspect that the larger DoD primes are going to be interested in helping subcontractors, particularly smaller subcontractors, get through the certification process, because they need to confirm that their subcontractors are certified at the appropriate CMMC level. So, if you're a small business, you have relationships with larger DoD primes, I recommend raising this issue as soon as possible. So then the PPP loans. So as mentioned, Jenny, I think the deadline for the second draw PPP loans is coming up soon, I think at the end of March. Companies are eligible for these second draw loans if they have 300 or fewer employees, which is down fairly significantly. The initial PPP loans was 500 or fewer, and that's counted together with affiliates, but they're not an excluded entity, meaning they're not suspended or debarred. The company received a first draw PPP loan and used it all for eligible expenses. And then the final qualification, this is really, sort of the key qualification, that the business experienced a 25% gross receipts decline from for any 2020 quarter over the corresponding 2019 quarter. So if for the first quarter of 2020, your gross receipts were down 25% or more from the first quarter of 2019, you qualify. So there is also a certification that's required, though. So even if you meet that qualification, you have to certify that current economic uncertainty makes this loan request necessary to support the ongoing operation of the applicant. And that's obviously a very individual determination. You've got to take a look at how your business is doing and whether that loan is really necessary. And just one or two other quick things about this second draw PPP loan. There is a good faith certification safe harbor that applied to the first draw, and my understanding is it also applies to the second draw. And that is, if your loan is below $2 million, the SBA will assume that you made this current economic uncertainty certification in good faith. So they're not going to question that certification if your loan is, $1.5 million. That doesn't mean that you're automatically going to get forgiveness, or that the SBA can't look to determine whether or not you were otherwise qualified for the loan. But this safe harbor is very important, because this current economic uncertainty certification is what is really confuse people. I mean, if you've had a 25% decline, but you have enough money to keep all of your people working and business has been otherwise pretty good, and the other 3 quarters, is there enough economic uncertainty for you to get the loan or not? I mean, the guidance just really doesn't answer that question well. And I think the other thing to keep in mind is the SBA and the Department of Justice, the government generally, are going to be targeting first the higher PPP loans for review and determination not as to whether or not those were appropriately made. So, if the loan that you're seeking is fairly small, you're likely not going to be audited or scrutinized. And I should also say that there's been such rampant fraud in the PPP program. I mean, companies falsifying that they exist, companies falsifying employee roles, and so on, that there's a lot of low-hanging fruit for the Department of Justice and for the SBA to go after. I'm I'm not at all saying make false certifications to the government, but so if you're diligent and you're careful about your certifications and you make sure you're providing honest information about your employees and so on, I think this is a great program and is something that small businesses really ought to look carefully at before that deadline comes in the next couple of weeks.
Well, and that's very interesting when you talk about the PPP. When it first came out and I looked at the list of the organizations that got it, I actually wrote articles and I called them the PPP bandits, because I was working with small businesses that were not able to get that first tranche of money because somebody else took it, and that somebody else bought yachts and did all kinds of things and said, well, I'm entitled to it. We're so tired of this whole sense of entitlement that comes up where, well, it doesn't say I can't, therefore I can. So I've been very vocal about my feelings on this. There also have been companies that I've worked with that chose to use the PPP proceeds and pay off their lines of credit. And to me, that wasn't really the right decision, but they had to make their own decision about that because we had no idea how long this uncertainty would go on. Think about it, Richard. This time last year, I was hosting GovCon Summit. You guys weren't able to come at the last minute, and we were toasting everybody on your behalf with Corona beer. But you couldn't travel to come to GovCon Summit. And we have learned so much in the last year, things that we never expected to happen. I mean, who would believe that this is kind of like the bubonic plague or something like that? But thank God there's some treatment. There's also been so much activity in related areas like the PPE equipment and so much. I had people calling me and saying, I got a truckload of PPE in a warehouse of Atlanta, and can you help me finance it? And I was like, that's not me, and I'm not going to get involved with things that I'm not sure about, because in government contracting, one of the number one things you don't want to do is go down a risk path, because you're just going to waste your time. Even people that are good at government contracting are taking risks every day with uncertainty, different answers, protests, and all that other. So that brings me up to one last area of what I call risk. When you talked about the prime contractors and them going to help their small businesses with CMMC, I'm a bit skeptical. Here's what I think is going to happen. It's the same thing that's always happened. Companies that are working with large primes don't know what they're getting into until they're working a proposal together. And at that point, the prime contractor will send their standard information that's called reps and certs, representations and certifications. People call me all the time about it because they'll say, it says I need to check a box about whether I have a DCAA approved accounting system. How do I get that? And can I get it by Monday? So first answer is absolutely not. You can't get it by Monday, but you have to have a plan. The second thing is inside those documents, I'm now seeing new sections about CMMC, and they're all yes or no questions. And they even say, have you been approved by a CMMC AB assessor? It's like, well, nobody has. How could you possibly say that? But small business doesn't know that answer yet. So what our goal is with our GovCon community, our GovCon Summit, is to have a place where people can ask their questions, because every day I learn something new about government contracting, and I've been doing this since the 80s. So that's why we need to have a community of practice, people we can count on, people we can ask in a random way. And the whole idea of GovCon Summit is, it's like the mall. I've got anchor tenants like Bass Berry Sims and my other partners. I've got specialty stores like me, who happens to be a financial person. And then I've got kiosk, I got the food court. Everybody that needs something can come find it inside there. And it's really an ongoing network and community that I can count on over and over again, because you know what? I want to make sure that nobody gets stuck. If you've ever had that situation where you wake up in the morning, you're like, oh my God, what have I done? I have just invited 500 people to an online virtual event, and it's got to be ready here in just a couple weeks. And you have that feeling of, I am stuck. How do I get help? And that's what GovCon Community, GovCon Summit can be all about. But Richard, as we wrap up, tell us a little bit more about the biggest change that you've seen in the last year since really GovCon Summit last year.
Well, obviously, the COVID pandemic has been very impactful. I think I think the gun is to be commended. It's used a lot of creative mechanisms to make sure that contracting partners were funded, and we had the PPP program and other things, but one of the mechanisms the U.S. government used to keep the economy afloat when things were looking a little bit dodgy in April, May, and June last year was to make sure payments to government contractors continued to flow, even if employees weren't able to get to a facility. Congress passed this a statute allowing DoD to make payments for contractors' employees were sort of in limbo, and I do think that there was a greater focus on partnership with the contracting community by DoD contracting officers. That's not necessarily to say that that's going to continue as the COVID crisis wanes, but I think that was heartening, and it was just a rediscovery of the tools that are available to contracting officers. So that was very positive.
I did see the government step up. I felt like all of my government contracting customers were taken care of and had to do some paperwork. Yeah. They were used to paperwork. They jumped right in and got it taken care of. And the other thing that's happened as a result of this is, as part of GovCon Summit, we actually have 2 sections that we're doing on thought leadership. One surrounds what I call the cloud coalition. What you talked about is JEDI, and our partners at Deepwater Point, Alan Meek, is going to be talking about what he calls Sec DevOps. So anything related to IT professionals, where all of these things are going to go is a big part of GovCon Summit. The second part that's important, I'm calling it the COVID coalition, because as we started getting into this, Deepwater Point has an expert named Anthony Hess, Dr. Anthony Hess, that's been in the healthcare field for a long time. He's going to be talking about the trends in the area, how the money is shifted, what agencies have it, where it's going. And I've actually got somebody that's an expert in the CDC that is going to talk about the global impact in what she calls public healthcare emergency medicine. And that's Ashley Gillis, who attended GovCon last year for the first time and has really made a big impact. So that's what we're doing, is trying to track trends and figure out what we can do with it. So, hey, Richard, thanks so much for being on today. We always enjoy having Bassbury Sims talk to us about the legal issues, and look forward to seeing you at GovCon Summit.
Thanks, my pleasure, and nice to see everybody today, and hopefully see some of you at the summit later on this month.